Okay, I think we'll begin. So good morning, everybody, and thanks very much for coming along today to our latest launch, the digitized town toolkit. 7 years ago, whenever STP was created to help Scottish Government with delivery of the Town Centre Action Plan, the Town Toolkit was one of the first products that we actually offered. This was an attempt to try and consolidate all of the learning and good practice. It was very shortly after the first Town Centre Action Fund in 2009-10. So we were gathering up all the best case studies so people wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel or start from scratch. It was an attempt to try and have a trusted, central, consolidated resource with all of the best practice around urban design and how to reinvent and repurpose our town centres and high streets, how to make places more active, more attractive, and more accessible. More active in terms of how do we keep the economy afloat with retail changing so quickly, and what other things do we need to bring into the town centre? More accessible, again, thinking about our changing demographic and the aging nature of demographic, the need for net zero and the changing patterns towards active travel, etc. So how does the urban realm play into that? How can we encourage that change in behaviour? A more attractive, again, there had been a period of disinvestment in the town centre, which made a lot of them look sort of dingy and glum. So how could, through interventions, could we make the place much more compelling for investors and to work better for the local community? So I have to say, over that period of 6-7 years, the Town Toolkit was very well used. We got lots of positive feedback, a whole range of different users from local government, architects, planners, urban designers, but also community groups engaged with the platform quite a lot. So we didn't want to stand still. We hosted a session just over a year ago, just before the pandemic kicked in, to ask the practitioners, what do you see, what improvements would you like to see in this toolkit? What are we missing? What gaps are there? And the feedback we got, it was quite difficult to navigate through a big document. So could we make it an online version, digitize it, make the navigation more simple, more around the aging demographic, the accessibility piece, building in the improvements around the place standard, place principle, looking at encouraging more town centre living and showing case studies on how that could happen, the digital economy, digital infrastructure, how best to deploy that. Obviously, then the big things were around climate, net zero, which were really missed in the first toolkit, and obviously more recently, how to future-proof our urban environments post-COVID. So I'm really pleased to be launching this new national resource this morning, particularly relevant given all of the very recent announcements given by Scottish Government in terms of support for the town centre agenda, the £325 million place-based investment fund, all of the new focus on terms of rebuilding post-COVID, and towns playing a massive part in all of that. So I hope that you find the new toolkit useful, and we welcome feedback. Obviously, now that we have a digitized version, an online platform, it's much easier for us to continually update, add additional case studies. You know, if you think there's things missing, we can get on top of that very quickly. First and foremost, though, I would like to thank the team that delivered this. So Nick Wright Planning. Nick has led the project very well. We've had a load of input from a variety of stakeholder organisations. We basically divided all the key themes and looked at the gap areas, and we pulled in the various stakeholder organisations and different community groups, different departments of Scottish Government, to really tease out what was needed, what needed to be included, what were the best practice examples, and what other resources we could add to it. So it's been a big collective effort, but in particular, I would just like to thank Nick and also Ben and Paolo from Kin, our web designers, who've done a terrific job. Bear in mind that this is a forerunner to the bigger Place portal, our Place portal, which will be launched by Scottish Government in due course. It's still under development, but we have designed this to basically bolt into that bigger national Place portal whenever it comes live. So without further ado, I would like to do the big reveal. We've got Nick ready to talk you through how this actually operates. So we want to see the first glance of the new digitised town toolkit. So over to Nick, who designed it and who built it. 3, 2, 1, Nick, the show is yours.
Great, thanks a lot, Phil. And you should be able to see on your screen now the the brand new toolkit just launched, and what we thought we'd do for a few minutes is just guide you through it. I'm sure some of you will already be scouting about on your screens, but I'll try and do that quickly for you. So just before I get into navigating around a few bits of it, as Phil said, it's really meant to be an online one-stop shop of information and examples and signposting to other resources and other toolkits elsewhere about how to make your town, and especially your town centre, the best that it can be. And we try to make it as lively and as appealing as we possibly can. So there's lots of video. You can see Phil's face there, and I think every single page just about has a video on it, if not more than one. Summaries of what's most important, information that gets straight to the point, and links to other resources. And I guess what's quite different from the previous toolkit is the breadth of the content. So you'll see in the menu bar at the top there, you'll see that the breadth covers everything from arts and culture to buildings and property, clean and green, about drainage and green things like that, things to support enterprise and business, things to improve streets and spaces, which was the big focus of the previous toolkit, some inspiring stories from various towns around Scotland, and then there's also a taking action section, which was drafted by Tom Snedden, who's here today. Thanks, Tom. So that's in there as well, about how to make things happen. So I'll guide you through a few of those bits, not everything, because that would take too long. But as I say, the point is we've pulled everything together in one place, not just focused on one particular agenda or the flavour of the month. And we hope that's really useful, because that doesn't actually get done very often. Phil has explained where it's come from. You can still see the previous 2015 toolkit on the website, on the Scotland Towns Partnership website. There's a lot of information that's useful in it still, but it was a narrower focus. Perhaps the game was given away actually by the original name for it was the Town Centre Master Planning Toolkit. And given it originated in the early 2010s, that was the kind of more narrow focus. So we're much broader now. And not being a PDF, but being a website means, as Phil said, it can be updated. And you'll see at the bottom of each page, as you can see if I scroll down the home page here, every page has this bit at the bottom that specifically asks if you've got any feedback or ideas or examples that you would like to see added, get in touch. And we like to keep it updated so it grows over time. Phil's already explained how it was put together with practitioners from across the country. And we've deliberately focused on trying to share the wealth of experience that already exists across the country, which we tried to do in the 2015 toolkit as well. But the idea was to inspire and enthuse, but also to give you confidence that you can do these things because they've been done somewhere else in Scotland before, and then help with practicalities. So that's why there's so much focus on, I guess, learning from examples elsewhere in the country. Everybody who was involved has been massively helpful, suggesting examples and content and contact details and links to other resources. So that's all in there. And we couldn't have done this without everybody who's been involved. So as Phil said, a big thank you. And there should be something in there for everyone, all the way from big, ambitious, multi-million new art centres, or whatever you might like in that scale, through to simple things like a one-off event or a small temporary installation. So there's something for everybody in there. The common thing is that they will all help bring more life, and they're all achievable. So onto the toolkit. So the structure is done by those themes, and I'll dive into 2 or 3 of them in a second. And there's the taking action bit that I mentioned earlier on, how to make things happen, and I'll quickly run through that as well in the next few minutes. So let me show you a little bit about how it works. Of course, you could read the how to use this toolkit on the home page there, which is pretty simple, and you can do that afterwards. What we thought we'd do is pick 3 sample people and questions who we think are pretty representative of the cross section of folk who are here today. So we'll run through those 3 examples. Hopefully there's something in them for all of you, or some of you for each one. And then we'll give you a chance to ask questions or explore it, or whatever you want to do, to have a few minutes chat at the end of that. So first example. So let's say that you work for a development trust. and that you're thinking of buying a building in your town centre and you're looking for some inspiration or some practical help about how do you go about that? What might you use that building for? Where might you start? You could equally work in economic development and have the same idea and be being asked to support a community purchase. Well, one way of starting on that would be if you go to the inspiration page up at the top on the menu here, you'll see here, there's only 4 at the moment, but there are 4 towns in there just now that we've written a little bit about. Dumfries and Huntley and Paisley and Stromness. And we hope that you will encourage us to add more to that. So that could be 8 or 12 or 16 towns around there in a few months' time. And I'm just going to dive into Dumfries with this question about buying a building in the town centre. So click on Dumfries. You'll see here, there's a little inspiration story, just a few paragraphs. As I said, there's a video, in fact, there's 2 videos on this one here, and it talks about the Stove Network, first of all, which set up a few years ago, a community arts organisation that you've probably all heard of, which started, one of the first things they did was to open a community cafe and a meeting place on the high street. And they've since expanded to a bigger project called the Mid-Steeple Quarter that, again, many of you may have heard of, I'm sure, which is the purpose of a whole block, working closely with the council and with others. So on that page there's links to more information about that project and how it took place. It's really just an intro on this page here, but you can click through to any of these sources of information further down. And in fact, there's other case studies on the toolkit as well about the Mid-Steeple Quarter that I'll probably come back to later on. And another example of inspiration stories is Huntley, which has been doing a lot over the last, 20 years plus. There's a couple of key organisations, community-led ones in the town, Durham Projects and the Development Trust. There's a little bit about both of those on the website here in the toolkit. Information about what they've been doing, about the journey they've had over the last few years, culminating in a plan a couple of years ago. And in the last year, they've got funding to acquire 2 or 3 existing empty buildings on the main square and to use those, I think, like a co-working space and a community shop. So they've got real practical experience there of acquiring buildings. And in fact, there are other examples elsewhere in the toolkit. So if we go back up to the top and to enterprise and business, talking of creating co-working space or small business space, if you dive into create space for business on the left-hand side there, then there's other examples of how to do that. From a private sector-led one in Falkirk there, again, more information about that. Co-working hub, which happens to be Scotland's Towns Partnerships base as well, the Melting Pot in Edinburgh, and they provide help to other organisations around the country as well if you need it. And there's examples of using libraries as hubs in various towns around the country as well. So there's various other examples of how to use empty space and convert that into business space. So, and going back to the sidebar on the left, you'll see there's other things in there as well about, sorry, if we go up to the top again, buildings and property. Again, this is what you should be doing, really, just diving around, having a look. Shop fronts and business premises. There's more suggestions there about how to use vacant property, how to go about it. Town centre living, similar, more examples in there from Perth, from Forfar, from Coatbridge. And the vacancy and dereliction, specifically on that issue, there are some examples there. And you'll see Dumfries is mentioned again if we scroll down with more information about that Mid-Steeple example. And a lot of these pages at the bottom, if I click on resources here on the left, and you scroll down to the bottom of these pages, you'll see links on to other toolkits and other information and that kind of thing there. So there's always more to look through. It's really a signposting document in many ways. So that was our first example. So you wanted to go about buying a building for community use. Second example, let's say that you're into the arts and music and events and that kind of thing. Perhaps you're part of an arts organisation who want to do something for the community, or you're being asked by an arts organisation to give them a hand and support. What sort of ideas could the toolkit help with, or practical advice? Well, as you would expect, let's go up to arts and culture at the top there, one of the high level menu items. And you'll see under here, like every other of these themes, there's a few different sub themes, if you like. Engage through art, open a cinema, start a creative hub. So there's half a dozen in there, and they're on the sidebar as well. And the introduction to arts and culture makes a point that I didn't fully realize until relatively recently, was how important arts and artists can be a way of attracting people and life into town centres, and the value that they add. So that point is just made in the introduction there. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see that there are ways into that. So let's just click on engage through art. And you'll see here, we mentioned the stove again, but there's others in there like Finhorn Bay Arts. I click down to that. They're based in Forres. They started out as a social enterprise originally, following the close of the Kinloss space by the RAF in 2011. And they do lots of activities and events really focused on things not just around music, but also things like baking and a bakery in the town centre and that kind of thing. So they do a lot of things to get people into the town centre. And there's examples and links on the page there. Made in Stirling, some of you may have heard of what they do. They took a derelict or a vacant property on King Street and created a hub for the local arts sector there, which is a showcase, a shop and a venue. So there's more information about that and links forward. So another great example there. And you carry on down, and other examples to look at. There's a whole host of links to other ones there, some of which are huge, great things, like the Durham Lumiere Festival is a biennial, very inspiring event that's really international, that takes place in Durham. But also, just to go back, straight beneath, above that, there's the Winter Wonderland Lighting Toolkit, which is a very small, very low cost thing which you could do. And there's a link to a video that explains that. And there's a toolkit linked through about how to go about organizing your own window wonderland. So that's the other end of the scale from Durham. That's much smaller. So that's a few examples of arts and culture. And there's a lot more that you can look into on that page there. So I'll leave you to explore that. And the last one we thought we'd put together is you might work for a business improvement district or a town centre management team, perhaps an economic development unit in the council, or you could be a councillor who wants to do something around business, but you're not to support business and enterprise, but you're not really sure what to do. So how might the toolkit help you? Well, I think the best answer actually is to dive in and to explore, but I'll let you do that. So I'll just do one way of doing it. So since we're talking about supporting business, let's go to enterprise and business up on the top menu here. And you'll see a few different things pop up here. How to create space, we mentioned already. How to support tourism and tap into that. You might want to be a themed town like West Kilbride or Fort William being the outdoor capital, or Wigtown, Booktown. There's a few examples in there about how to do those things. What I'm going to look at though is go digital, because this is probably the most tricky bit that we had to write for the toolkit actually and to research, because there's so much going on in digital and there's so many different views about what to do about digital. So what we did here was look at what actually works. I'm sure this section will change quite quickly over the next year or two. And that's a mixture of things like shop local web platforms, ways of helping your town's firms or businesses maximize their online business. Apps like Shop Appy are working in Kirkcaldy, for example, and also one called Hunger, which is Dundee based, and they've been doing things in St Andrews and Dunblane and probably elsewhere by now too. So they help support businesses to get more online footfall. So that's one way of viewing digital. Another way is Cooper has a digital improvement district, which has been going for a couple of years now. Originally it's a demonstration town. So there's a lot of learning from what Cooper's been doing, focusing on digital. And there's links to all that from this case study in here. So you can get more information about Cooper and what they've been doing and see the benefits of it. see some evidence about that as well. So that's all linked from there. There are loyalty cards and gift cards, and in fact, some of you may already have been signing up for the Scotland Loves Local gift card that's about to launch, which you can see here. And there's a great video there from Lerwick, which I think is a great one to watch. And the Scotland Loves Local gift card is about to launch. And if you click through on that link, then that takes you through to the STP page about the new gift card, and you can register on there for that. So if we go back into here again, and I'm going to scroll down a bit further, there's a lot more information from guidance that Scotland's Towns Partnership produced a couple of years ago, and there are examples and links in there as well. So there's a lot of information there about how to make best use of digital for your town, which I think is a really challenging one, and I think a lot of other people do as well. Going back to enterprise and business in total, you'll see there are other things around tourism, and I've already mentioned about what's your theme towns. And again, at the bottom of all this, there are resources. So you can see links through to other toolkits. The tourism one is particularly worth looking at, potentially. There are lots of toolkits out there around tourism. Ayrshire and Arran have got one that's their own community tourism toolkit, but lots of lessons for other people. And Visit Scotland have got lots of different ones, including an inclusive tourism toolkit as well, which is quite a valuable one. And in fact, just a quick word on that, the search mechanism is really quite good on the website, thanks to Ben and the team at Kin. And inclusive, there are some interesting, sorry, that's the wrong link. There are some interesting case studies about inclusion and the importance, not just from a human perspective of helping disabled people and those more vulnerable to enjoy and make the most of their town. Whatever's done for someone who's disabled or has dementia is really going to be good for everybody as well, about accessibility and navigation and that kind of thing. So there are good examples from around the country of how to do these things, how to involve people in design and maintenance of streets and spaces from Perth. That's always a hot topic in towns, maintenance of the public realm. And there's a link here to Chester, one of the very few links out with Scotland. I think Chester and Durham might be the only two. Reason Chester's in there is it's made a really big push in recent years about helping the whole town become more disabled friendly, some of which is about public realm, some of which is around information and working with businesses and organizations to support that. And there's evidence from Chester around the value of the purple pound, as it's called, and how much it can help your town centre and your town in terms of economics, apart from the whole sort of human thing of supporting disabled people and inclusive design. And there's lots more on that page too. So that's 3 example people, which hopefully have given you a bit of a flavour. Finally, I'll just show you the taking action page, which is a bit different from the other pages. This is more based around, there's a lot in the toolkit. There's so much you could do, but how do you work out what to actually focus on for your town? Well, that's what this taking action section is for. And we've deliberately tried to keep it really simple because it runs the risk of getting overwhelming and too complicated. So it just runs through a sequence of, these are the important things that you need to do for your town centre. You need to work together, you need to agree a plan, you need to deliver projects, and you need to measure success. And that's a kind of, that's not a vicious circle, it's a virtuous circle, and it can help get funding and resources to make things happen. In an ideal world, you would start with collaboration and organising, but the reality is everywhere, every town is somewhere on that circle already. And we just run through the main points in this section around how to go about each of these 4 things. So the section basically has links under each of these 4 headings about how to go around collaboration, who needs to be involved, what their roles might be, how to go about producing a plan and very basic information and sources of sort of more information about how to go about that. So that's there. How to get resources, and that's primarily a link to Scotland's Towns Partnerships funding finder, which is updated every month and is a really good resource. So that's primarily a link into that. And then there's also, sorry, skipped one. There's more information about resources, how to go about delivery and different roles of different organizations, and then a section about how to evaluate and measure success. And again, it's relatively brief, as you can see. There's 2 or 3 examples at the bottom of that there. So that's the taking action section, which we hope will be helpful to help people navigate through how to go about making change happen. And that takes us back to the very start, back to the homepage. So that's the end of the whirlwind tour in 20 minutes. Hope it hasn't overwhelmed you, but it's let you get a flavor of the inspiration and the practicalities and the resources that are in there. So I think best thing to do is probably to hand back to Phil at this point. We'd love to hear from what you've heard. If there are any questions that you've got about how you might go ahead using this, and we can maybe guide you through a live tutorial almost. But let's see where the questions go. So, back to you.
That's brilliant. Brilliant, Nick. Thanks so much for that. It always makes it much easier for people to get a guided tour to see the art of the possible. I mean, people need to realize this is a national resource. This isn't owned by any individual organization, STP. This belongs to Scotland. So we want to encourage people. We want to inspire people. We want to create a resource that's going to be useful up and down the country. And I think we've made a good starting point, but it really is just a snapshot of all the innovative things that are happening in the country just now around placemaking, around COVID. So I have to say, I like to just take a wee moment in time, because Nick and the team have put a tremendous amount of work over the last year into this. Tom Snedden, it's great having Tom, the co-founder of the Development Trust movement in Scotland, but also a practicing architect, because Tom has been through this journey 100 times, and he was really, really helpful in terms of being able to inspire people from grassroots community action, but also linking that to the big bad world, the private sector. What are these guys looking to see? How do we drive that collaboration? So the how-to section, which was undertaken by Tom, I think is very inspirational as well, in terms of how do you eat that elephant? How do you make that first step? It's maybe not as difficult as you think. And certainly inaction is not an excuse. You have to be thinking about doing something. So we hope that it's a useful tool. So I suppose we'll take a few questions now. I'll try and direct either to myself or Nick primarily, but again, in summary, this is your tool, this is your resource. We will only be able to refine and improve this moving forward once you give us feedback. So take a few weeks to go in and poke about, to play with it, to look at what it can do. And importantly, we've seen a few people raise the question in the question bar, can we add our case studies to it? Of course you can. So either let Nick or myself know if you've got good case studies, and we can see where best to plug them into the resource. And I think it's really important at an individual local level that you're showcasing all the good work that you're doing. Let your citizens and let your politicians know that you're actually making improvement and progress, and also create that inspiration for people across the country who can follow you. The first question I'm going to pose to Nick around the 20-minute neighbourhood. Is there a direct link, Nick, back to the 20-minute neighbourhood work that's evolving from Scottish Government? If you could unmute and maybe answer that one.
Is there a direct link? That's a good question. I'm sure there is, and I'm struggling to remember where it is amongst the wealth of stuff that's in there. It could be in the about section, but if I don't find it straight away, I will have a look and find out where it is and let you know. I mean, the honest answer is that, in fact, the whole thing should be supporting the 20-minute neighbourhood. I can't see the link, but it will be there somewhere, and I will continue to have a look, and I'll put it into chat when I find it.
Okay. I see a point again from the question bar about how do we repurpose buildings, which has come in from Bill Sadler. Yes, there's a lot of examples, Bill, depending what you're actually trying to achieve in a building. Moving out of COVID, I think we'll see a lot of commercial space and potentially the shedding of further public assets as there's a consolidation. So there will be empty spaces, banks are moving out of town, and we have to be on the front foot about what these could be repurposed into. So if it's not directly in the toolkit, you can also come directly to STP and arrange to speak to myself or even to Nick about some good examples of buildings that have been taken over. Examples that spring to mind would be Creative Sterling, who've taken over the retail unit in the heart of King Street, which used to be a Wilco retail unit. So taking over a large space to create an artists collective, not just to display concessionary art pieces and craft, but also to have maker creator spaces and to link in with the Men's Shed Club. So there was a social purpose as well, but it created a lot of footfall into the town. There are other places where banks have been turned into children's nurseries or to business centres. So if you've got a particular question and it's going down into that depth about business modelling, etc., you're probably best to come directly to myself and I can point you in the right direction. I think Nick's away to link the toolkit to the 20-minute neighbourhood just now. Let's just see. A lot of questions coming in about the resource section, but I think Nick answered that in the how-to. Obviously, we do a lot of work around the funding finder on a monthly basis. It's a very, funding for regeneration and placemaking is a very complex thing because there's so many aspects to it. There's money that comes in from net zero, active travel, historic environment, tourism, Scottish government, local government, etc., private sector investment. So it is a very complex pot. But the funding finder that we do behind the scenes, we work on a regular basis to make sure that all of the funds that are relevant are included, the eligibility criteria, the closing dates, etc. So the direct link to the funding finder should mean that all of the information is current and up to date. And that actually gets sent out as a bulletin to STP members on a monthly basis. But we will link people directly to that through the Town Toolkit portal.
What's great to see from the chat is that there are people who are already suggesting, can we add more toolkits from themselves? So for example, Sarah from Senscott has said she'd be happy to share our learning from the community-led tourism proof of concept project. That's great. That's exactly the kind of thing which we're delighted to hear, because the more this can become a hub, if you like, for people to come to as a one-stop shop, the more useful it's going to be for everybody. And I've never seen anything quite like that anywhere in the UK. So I think it would be useful for a huge number of people. And I see Bill Sadler has asked, are there links providing inspiration as to how to make elements in a proposed new building, e.g. for art gallery, local tourist information, pay their way? Yes is the answer, but you'll have to do a little bit of work yourself on the back of that, because what the toolkit does is, if you dive into the buildings and property section especially, then you will come across various case studies and examples there of new buildings which have an art gallery, for example in Kirkcudbright, or local tourist information. The thing you'll need to do is to then get in touch with those, and they mainly have, well, each one should have contact details in the toolkit that you can contact and find out more information. The vast majority of people will be absolutely delighted for you to get in touch with them, because it helps spread the word about what they're doing. So that's the kind of principle that we've adopted there.
And I see we've got a first from David Dunlop, a good idea from David Dunlop. These are things that we need to sort of record formally, because they don't come in very often from David. But the idea of using the Town Toolkit as part of this drive towards each town having a dedicated town, which is one of the recommendations that's come out of the Sparks review, A New Future for Scotland's Towns. We're asking towns to be regarded much more strategically as part of NPF4, and that filters down then into the various sustainability, into economic, into inclusion plans, into housing plans, but also then through the national framework, through regional spatial strategies, down into local development plans, and then at the granular level, town plans. And I think that's a great idea, David, that we can give this to developers as a guide. so we get much more quality built into the sort of thinking around how our town centres will look in the future, because they're going to look different. You know, they're not going to be the same. There is going to be a further reduction in retail, and we need to keep our town centres active. So how do we reimagine that space? Through bringing in residential above frontages, but keeping the frontages active and making them relevant to local population, etc. So thinking about even in economy uses, leisure, health and well-being economy, biodiversity, greening up, etc. Just making the whole place more accessible and open to other people. So that's a brilliant one, David. Giving that to your developers as part of local development plans and town planning. That's your how-to guide for the commercial guys that are, and the public sector people who are involved in developing these town plans. So good point.
There's a suggestion from Heather as well about, is there a mechanism created to highlight what's new as we go along, adding new things, because it'll be a dynamic platform, which is a great point, Heather. So thank you. We'll obviously look into that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that from Heather, and I think what we need to do is think about perhaps every month on the front page, the landing page, just making sure there's a what's new section that we can populate to keep the document live. Whenever for people's understanding, whenever we first worked with the architecture and planning team within the Scottish Government to create this toolkit, there was a good mixture of people involved in the process. And there was always a desire to make it more digitized, to make it more real time, to actually even think about making ownership of it open to people in Scotland so that you could directly add. We ran out of time and resource at that stage. So we've now been able to catch up and get to that point. So think of this as a living wiki document. Think of this as a feed, a live feed, where we can constantly bring in the new thinking, because things change. Cycles are shorter now. Things change a lot faster. The climate emergency is right on top of this. COVID was very quick to land, and we need to be able to inspire people and be on the front foot with design solutions and making sure that best practice is shared more widely. So yes, I think a what's new section could just keep the landing site very attractive and inspiring.
And there's a question from David McDougall. How does the toolkit secure the primacy of placemaking over traffic engineering policy? And I guess it doesn't, is the honest answer. That's such a big issue that there are limits to what even an all-embracing toolkit can do. So it has examples in there of how to do it well, but I think securing the primacy here, as you've asked quite rightly, David, I think is really beyond the scope of the toolkit, but hopefully it'll just help a little way in order to get another step on the journey.
Okay. To be honest, I think most of the feedback that we're seeing from this reveal is that people are quite excited, and it looks as if it's going to do the thing we hoped it would do, which is to inspire and to encourage. So I think we can probably close off just now by saying to people, go and have a look at the toolkit and come back with any feedback. You've now seen that we have a mechanism to update this fairly regularly. So please, if you've got case studies, additional links, etc., just drop them to me, and we'll think about how we get those added as soon as possible. So just be honest and brutal and blunt about the feedback, because that's the only way we'll make improvements. And this is your resource, so please use it. Encourage your partners to use it. There's a lot of inspiration within that document. There's a lot of encouragement. There's a lot of ways to stop reinventing the wheel. And I think we just need to be cognizant of how our population is changing and how our urban environments are changing, and making sure that we're sharing all of that information and knowledge to make sure that we can build back a stronger, more resilient and greener Scotland that's more inclusive and involves more community and private collaboration. So without further ado, I would like to thank you all for your time. But again, just to reiterate my thanks to Nick, to Tom, to Ben and Paolo at Kin for doing a fantastic job, but also to all of the stakeholders that fed into the process and helped us develop this national resource. So all the best, have a good day, and let us know what you think. Send us your feedback as soon as you can. Thank you all.